what's tell me how you mentioned how you got into this new book that you just published. What War on the Porch? The this key main character you said was patterned after somebody who was blinded in the war and then became a virtuoso pianist.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had the opportunity to meet them and talk to them, or have you just studied their history?
I just studied their history and World War One. I looked. He was from Kansas, and I've called the VA up there if they knew anything
Uh-huh.
about him because he did a lot of stuff after the war to help veterans,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and they don't have anything on him, and so it's just really how I think that person would be. Then I put him in in a love story with Pauline in the book. So it's just really doing that research around that and doing research around the Veterans Administration, which wasn't even created, after at
Right.
World War One ended. It was after that, and then tying all that together. And I wanted to make, because it does deal with some PTSD issues in the book that I wanted to make aware that that it does deal with it, but reach out. There, two people. You don't need a group. Two people can talk together to help somebody through. Certain time of their life.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to put that in, add that to the book too. And that's what these two, that, totally different individuals, they bond. And that's why, because now they're a common theme.
I I like that you picked out specific subject matter that you think the public really needs to be aware of and promote. The book that I just showed you, Robber Barons, part of I've had an outline for the book for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years before I ever sat down to write the first word. And when I outline, it's very simple. I write a one-page outline of the entire book. Here is where I'm going to start the book. Here is where I'm going to end the book. And just very 3 or 4 really key events along the way that I have to track into. And then I develop the characters, and they go on note cards, old-fashioned note cards. But until I get into the second chapter, I'm not quite sure how I'm going to get to the third chapter in writing the book.
Right.
And the Robber Barons, part of why I think it's important right now is it focuses on how brutally effective big business was in suppressing small companies and individuals.
Oh my God, yes.
And business during the time period right at the end of the last century. And we're at a time right now where an awful lot of young people believe that is going on again. They are very angry at the capitalist system. They blame the system for it. And in the Robber Barons timeline, there was no question. It was brutal from a lot of the robber barons. And yet the industrialists themselves were the guys that came along and solved the problem. It wasn't government that solved the problem. The industrialists put people into office that could solve the problem. So it was, and that's part of the message I'm trying to get across as I write this book. But if it isn't fun, nobody will read it.
So did you, while writing it, did you find any like surprises that like really kind of, whoa, I didn't know that, or how can I put this in the book, or something just stood out that I didn't know, you didn't know?
I especially found them when I backtracked to research specific facts for one section. I would find all kinds of surprises there. And one of the things that really shocked me, I think, is there is a couple of the critical characters in the book are very religious, and the book is primarily set in Alaska, and the faith people in Alaska did some really remarkable things. They provided education. They fundamentally changed the healthcare system in rural Alaska and for the villages and so forth. But they also took great advantage of a lot of the native people. Some of Alaska's wealthiest early people were people who came in and just raped, pillaged, and burned in the villages in the name of God. And I had an inkling of that. I've known a couple of those people who survived into my era. People who I would not say that I would deliberately run over them if they were on the side of the street. But if they were lying there bleeding, I would probably call paramedics rather than try and help myself. Um, so, and I worked that into the book a little bit as well, um, because I wanted one of the critical characters in the end, one of the most important characters, is a young Native woman who the church found, educated, and then sent off to a university. And she came back totally immersed in the white culture, only to be completely rejected because of the color of her skin. And the racism was just rampant in Alaska at that time. And you know, if you were black, you were okay, but if you were Native, you were not. And I needed to tell that part of the story, but I was really amazed at how emphatic or how brutal that part of that time period was.
Right.
That was one of the shocking things. The other thing that shocked me from time to time is how bad some of my good guys can be. And when I write the character, I like, you know, if they aren't flawed, they aren't interesting. But sometimes I get a little carried away, I think. And yet at the same time, I think those flaws make them real.
Yeah, that period of time was, you know, that's when they started coming up with all this monopolies, right? Trying to break up the monopolies, Standard Oil, the railroad companies, all these things, Mellon, right? All these robber barons. I mean,
the robber barons.
Yeah, they were. They were.
Well, as they were being pushed out of the lower 48, they came to Alaska, and the Congress was desperate for income out of Alaska after spending the money to buy it. The only thing of income at the time that they bought it was the fur seal trade, and that had collapsed. So whatever they could do to generate income out of Alaska, they were doing. Not to take care of the people, just to generate income. Yeah. And so, you know, they basically handed Alaska to many of the robber barons on a silver platter. And the people that were fighting them in Congress, as today, would find enormous amounts of money being spent in their districts to defeat them. And it wasn't, you know, the robber barons didn't go away instantly. Okay, you could hear their fingernails going down the chalkboard as they went.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of that was here.
Yeah, they weren't going to go away easy. Right, they were vested.
They were.
That's where they were making their money.